Hello and welcome. We're just going to wait a couple of seconds and we will get started. Welcome to today's PSMJ podcast presents Selecting Your Firm's Next CEO, Leaders Who Made It Through the Transition. My name is Kathy Cesari of PSMJ. Before we get started, let me go over a couple of housekeeping details. First, there will be a Q&A session at the end of the broadcast. If you want to ask something in the meantime, please feel free to do that. I'll try to keep up with the chat. Second, this has been okayed for continuing education credits with the AIA CES. All you have to do is send your number, AIA number, to customerservice@psmj.com to receive 1 PDH credit. However, you must submit your certificate to the appropriate board. I will be sending information out tomorrow with that information as far as how to get your attendance certificate, the recording, and where to listen to the podcast. Now that we have that all out of the way, let's dig in. Welcome, Brian Burnett from PSMJ. Brian, you're muted.
All right.
Thank you, Brian.
I'm sorry, Kathy. Well, thank you. It is my pleasure to be here. We appreciate all of you. And there's about 150 signed up, taking time out of your busy schedules to hear from 4 leaders who have been front and center with the transition of the CEO position, one of the most important decisions that has to be made in a firm. From these real-life experiences, we plan to provide you with some of the key aspects of a successful transition. I am pleased to have with me today from EMC Engineering Services, current CEO Chuck Perry, and former CEO Larry Stuber. And from Harriman, Architecture, Engineering, and Planning, current CEO Mark Lee, and former CEO Cliff Greim. Welcome, gentlemen.
Welcome. Thank you.
Let's jump in. Chuck, tell us a bit about your firm. You're mute too, Chuck. Sorry.
Technology.
Yes.
EMC Engineering is a consulting engineering firm, started in Savannah. We have 10 locations in Georgia and South Carolina. We have about 105 people. About 40% of our business is developers, 30% local government, and the rest state government and federal government. So that's a brief description of who we are. I could talk about it all day, but I'll save the rest.
All right, thank you. And Mark, you're getting ready to celebrate a significant anniversary. Why don't you share about that and what your firm does? Mark, are you mute too?
Thank you, Brian. Can everyone hear me all right now?
We are. We all got muted. Yes.
All righty, very good. So yeah, no one told us when we got ready to celebrate our 150th anniversary as a firm that we'd be in the midst of a pandemic. So we've sort of decided we're going to be 150 for 2 years this year. But we're a 150-year-old firm, and I'll be about the 7th, I think, leader. So that just means that I can't screw it up. We're comprised of about 85 employees. We work, what I used to say, in 4 offices. I think we're now in about 80 offices, but through Zoom and whatnot. And architecture, engineering, planning, and heavy focus on education environments, general practice, institutional work, and our revenue probably splits about half and half in terms of engineering projects and architecture.
Great, thank you. All right, Larry, we're going to start off with you. Tell us what time frame your transition took place.
To get it in context, I need to start with founding the firm in 1978. Just me. The firm grew over the next 10 years to roughly, in the late 80s, 30 or 40 people. And in the early 90s, and this is open to some question, I initiated an ESOP based on a recommendation of my CPA as a potential method for transitioning myself out of the company 10, 15 years down the road. We were not committed to it, but we did put it in place and to see how it worked for 2 or 3 years. And then I would say in the early 1995, we had our first strategic plan, a weekend type arrangement with a consultant. And we had 5 more, or not 5 more, we had a second and third strategic planning session over the next probably 10 years. And then shortly after the last one, I retired. So, you know, you pick your date when you say we started the transition. Could have been the ESOP in 92. It could have been any one of the strategic planning sessions in 95, 2000, or 2005. So you could pick a 5-year time horizon, or you could pick a 15-year. I prefer going back to the ESOP because I think without that, we would have had a hard time figuring out what the company was worth.
All right.
And, the ESOP provided that, and it provided a 15-year history that everybody in the company understood. So,
all right. Well, Larry,
choice.
thank you for that detail. And Cliff, what was the time frame for your transition? When did it happen?
Yeah, well, we actually began in earnest in October of 2018. So it was almost 2 years, maybe a year and a half or so. But we began at one of our retreats, and we looked at our administrative organization, which was structured with a president CEO at the top. And we in our retreat reviewed that, knowing that we would initiate a transition process over the next couple of years. And we decided to go with a CEO, COO shared responsibility model. PSMJ helped us with that. We defined what the organization would look like. We defined the roles of the CEO and COO. We developed a timeline that we thought we could live with. And then we put in the various steps to go through. So it's almost 2 years of transition planning and implementation.
Okay, thank you. Larry, your firm took a little longer than expected in terms of making the formal transition. For context, tell us what happened with your first selection.
We had, at the time of the first transition, we were 150, 160 employees, and about 10% of those had ownership interest in the company. So we had roughly 20 owners, that various percentages. And that group came to a consensus on the choice for the new CEO. And he took over, and it was the plan for me to stay around another year or two and then retire. It didn't go as well as we thought. There were some serious mistakes made that would have not been good for the company as a whole. So I came back in, and we went through another year of trying to find the appropriate leadership. And at the end of that year, we were able to settle in, and that same basic group chose Chuck Perry, and Chuck Perry accepted. And I thank him for that.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing that. And along the way, we'll share some perspectives about the points we just covered. And I think these last few comments point to the fact that these transitions take time. They can't be rushed. And some of them have points along the way that you have to step back and redo your work. And so for those out there contemplating a transition, time is your friend. You've got to really focus on using your time as best you can. So Cliff, since you were responsible for the transition, tell us one or two things that were really important to you as you contemplated how you were going to do the transition.
Yeah, there were some foundational things I was looking for as we went into the transition. I did establish a kind of an executive transition team of 3 that we all shared some responsibility. But there were certain things I was looking for, and I think most would. First of all, I wanted to make sure that I could see well into the future and know that the organization was healthy financially, that we had leadership at the top, in the middle, at the lower areas of our organization that would be there to support any new administration. I wanted to make sure that we were in all areas of our practice with strength and leadership. And I wanted to really make sure that as we went through a very thorough process of assessing characteristics and candidates for this position, that there was a strong understanding of what the culture of Harriman was. Harriman, as we had heard, is 150 years old, and it's had now 7 presidents or CEOs. But there's this thread of culture that Harriman has shared and not changed. And I think to the benefit of the organization, we needed to make sure we had a good grasp on that, because we had, almost 100 people all acclimating and wanting to be part of this culture, and to change it may have been too disruptive. So those are some of the things I wanted to make sure were in place, and that we had the candidates necessary to accomplish that.
Thank you, Cliff. A lot of great detail there. Larry, what were a few things that were really important to you as you started the transition?
My philosophy when I started the company in 1978 was to develop a firm, consulting firm, that had the capability to reward young people coming along, registered in their various disciplines, and provide a mechanism for them to have ownership in the company. I was with another firm before I started EMC, and there was no commitment to younger people becoming owners based on their performance and all that. So over that 30 some odd years that I was there, we worked real hard at developing ownership requirements, a progressive schedule from going from an initial associate owner to up to a senior principal owner. So during that 10 or 15 year period that we were in transition, we went from 3, I was the primary owner. I owned the majority of the company, and we went from 3 owners to, I believe it was 20 or 21 in 06. And during that last 4 or 5 year period, I sold my percentage down to the equivalent of a senior principal, one of the senior ownership positions in the company. And eventually I left and sold the balance.
Okay, thank you. Between the both of you, a lot of great points there that really, I think, undergird and support the perspective that leadership development is a process that never ends. It takes a lot of effort. There's that ripple effect that that Cliff mentioned, where picking one leader ripples down into other parts of the business. So a lot of great points. Thank you. Chuck, when you got involved with being considered, was there a detailed job description for the position?
Yes, there was. And I was involved, during the first process. We had the members of the strategic planning committee went through the PSMJ process, where it was basically, anyone within the corporation that thought they had the qualifications and the qualities to be the chief executive, submit your name, and you'll be part of the evaluation process. And a lot of us did. I submitted my name. Several of the other associates and principals submitted their names to be evaluated, to understand where they stand with their peers, is basically what that process was. And I participated in the stump speeches that were given by the stronger candidates for the position. Participated in the straw poll voting that happened because of that, or at the end of that. And then the board of directors, took that information and made the final decision on the initial candidate. And then I became more involved because I was elected to be the chairman of the board in the spring of '06, while we were in the midst of a national search for an external candidate. So it was a process that led me to understand that that we needed to keep the leadership of the firm inside our firm, really pony up myself and say, okay, I can do this, and I can put this team together. So, and that's what happened. Larry and I, through a lot of conversations and a lot of discussions regarding the future, really led to my becoming the chief executive officer.
Okay, thank you. Again, a lot of great detail. Mark, tell us a bit about the job description, or what was used to define the position, and your reaction to that as you got involved.
Sure, absolutely. We actually, one of the early steps was to sit down and draft up what the job description was. Particularly, as Cliff had mentioned, we decided a new leadership structure where we were going to have a CEO and a COO. So it was imperative that we really define clearly whose responsibilities were those of the CEO and those of the COO. And so that was one of our initial steps. And actually that was one where PSMJ assisted us in developing that. Beyond that Cliff has about a size 14 shoe, so it was really tough to fill those shoes. Really having him as a mentor and understanding, there's one thing of seeing all these written items of requirements for the role, but it's another thing to really work with someone. And I've worked with Cliff for over 20 years, and so really seeing him as a mentor was probably the best preparation for me through the preparation to become the CEO of the firm. And there really were sort of five kind of key areas that we developed as we went through the process of coming up to speed and enacting this new co-management or co-leadership structure. But But like I said, I think largely it's the overlap and mentorship of working around the person for a long time that ultimately you start to absorb that culture of the firm and understand some of the unwritten aspects of the role.
Great. Thank you, Mark. A lot of terrific detail in these responses. And for the listeners, I want to provide some clarity around what PSMJ calls an open process and a closed process. And a closed process is where a small group or the board will decide, and the announcement is made of the new leader. And these processes and transparency and all the things that you've heard already that these two firms worked with don't exist. And so we're talking about the open process, which we believe has got a lot of advantages, especially if you've got several people who are interested in the position and feel qualified for it. So just be clear when you think about these processes that there's two ways to look at it, and we're focused on the open process. So Larry, did you have any help in planning and putting this together? Were you really the point person as this transpired?
Yes, I would say it was the strategic plans that we conducted beginning in 1995, every 5 years. They all, I don't remember the exact focus of each of those sessions, weekend type sessions for the primary ownership of the company. But transitioning and organization and goals and all that kind of thing was front and center during those strategic plans. And then probably the last one in 05 focused on the transition.
Okay. Well, thank you for mentioning the importance of a strategic plan, which again is encouraged for all firms to have. Cliff, did you have anybody helping you, or did you handle pretty much everything associated with the transition?
I was the point. I did, as I mentioned earlier, we had a small executive transition team that we established internally. You folks, PSMJ, actually gave us some guidance through this as well. You know, we went through a pretty rigorous evaluation process as candidates put forth their names once they knew what was embodied in the job descriptions. There was a Harrison assessment that was done and facilitated by you folks. And one of the things I would just mention is, as you're beginning to plan a transition, you really need to be honest with each other and say, as you put your name forth to be considered, understand that as we go through and vet you and take a look and go through the Harrison assessment or whatever tool you use, those characteristics come out are not there to be critical, or they're not there to necessarily even represent how hard you work or don't work. It's really, are you ready to take on a leadership role? It doesn't reflect your technical skill. And so I would just say that when we evaluated candidates and we had very secured feedback sessions, it wasn't open, transparent feedback that everybody could hear. We had it one-on-one, and Dave was on PSMJ was on those calls. There were some that received it and listened and understood it. There were some that bristled quite a bit. And I would just say, be aware of that. But our process was open, Dave. And as you mentioned, that's how we conduct ourselves daily at Harriman. And we wanted it to be transparent. We wanted it to be open. We wanted it to be the voice of the leadership. We even went through and did polling within our senior administration and the office beyond just the principals, outside of the Harrison assessment. And so we used both of those tools together to lead us towards and fund. All that information went back to the candidates, and it culminated in presentations that were outstanding. And it made it very difficult for our team to make a recommendation to the board of directors, but it ultimately did. And we have a great CEO and a great COO because of it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for all those encouragements that you included in my question. Mark, it's been brought up that this team was created at the outset that was responsible for certain parts of the process. Can you quickly describe the composition of that team and what it did?
Absolutely. The team was comprised, as has been mentioned, of 3 individuals. And they represented different areas of the firm and with different perspectives. And so we had folks that had been with the firm for a period of time, as well as folks that hadn't been with the firm for all that long. And so I think that perspective was really helpful in understanding and thinking about the balance of finding someone that could continue the legacy and understand the culture of the firm, but also the need to address aspects of the firm and strike a vision for the future. And so we had a diversity of departments. We had engineers and architects, and we also had a range of ages and sort of to get a broader perspective that I think was very, very helpful.
And am I correct that this team had administrative responsibilities as well?
It did. It was not only responsible for sort of being the guide, but of the process, but it actually held themselves accountable to make sure that we were meeting the goals that we had set forth to achieve over the course. So early on in the process, again, another aspect that was very helpful with PSMJ when they came in, we really looked at defining what that process was going to be to get us from the point where we were just starting on the journey of searching for the new CEO and COO to when we would actually make an announcement. And so that group met regularly, weekly, and evaluated where they were, what needed to be done, and created action steps and held themselves accountable to make sure that we were getting there. And so it was quite an effort on top of everything else but without that, I don't think that we would have been as successful as we were.
Well, and I think certainly my experience is that this team is really important as you develop the strategies for this open process, and they can be very valuable in ensuring that you have a strong outcome. Chuck, Cliff just mentioned that they had used some assessments, the Harrison assessment specifically, to determine strengths and weaknesses of candidates. What was used in your process?
Larry might have a better memory than I do, but you know, like I said, that has been about 20 years ago. I recall that we had a grading scale, maybe on a 1 to 10 scale, on different characteristics based on, you know, your interaction with folks, that led to a point scale. And I don't really recall, you know, exactly what all of them was. Tenacious was one of them. I figured I would fit well in that category, but basically the character, it was a character evaluation, and a potential for leadership. So as far as the exact information that was in there, I don't really recall, but it was a process, and I thought it was a fair process to gain perspective from everyone's perspective as to the leadership potential of all of the candidates.
So the internal staff evaluated the candidates. Am I correct?
You are correct, and I think it was everyone from the janitor to the chairman of the board.
Okay, great, very unique. And Cliff, did you use internal assessments by staff or the other leaders? Was that included?
Yeah, we had the Harrison, which was independently done. And it was a result of the candidates inputting their data into that assessment. We also did an internal polling of all principals, all associates, and all of our senior staff. And what we did is we assembled the internal polling and tried to align it in categories similar to the Harrison. And it really gave us a broad perspective. The Harrison gave us an unbiased, just a black and white assessment of each individual. The internal polling was geared, and the questions were such that it basically asked for, is this person a great communicator, a great leader, a motivator? Is it someone that you would, be able to follow, support, and respect? And there was a whole series of questions like that. And so when you looked at the package, then it began to weight certain candidates over the others.
Well, thank you. Larry, did you use any other assessments that you can remember? Larry, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Okay.
There you go.
My recollection is we did have some, I call them psychological personality tests of some type. I don't remember what they were. And, but it, it had a name, but I can't remember what the name of it.
Okay. Well, I think the important point is that you use tools like that.
Oh, yeah.
And just to wrap up this section, PSMJ has been working with the Harrison assessment for a long time. We really like it because it's a competency-based assessment, not a personality assessment. And if you're interested in this assessment tool, you can contact Diane Constantine in the PSMJ office, and she'll give you all the information you need. So thank you guys for a lot of great information. So Mark, let's move on to the nomination process. And I think Chuck alluded to this earlier. How were you nominated for the position?
Yeah, Brian, this one I think is an easy one. I just raised my hand. We had a very sort of informal process. It was really those in the ownership group. It sounds like it was similar to what Larry and Chuck had experienced, but it was those who felt that they wanted to put their name in for consideration. It was an open process. They were allowed to do that. Early on, we wrestled with the idea that should it be really an internal candidates, or should we consider external candidates? And we had guidance that transitions with external, bringing in someone externally, are more difficult for a number of reasons. And so we looked at our internal pool of candidates and moved in that direction. So it was as simple as saying, if you feel you're interested in pursuing this as the next level, to go ahead and put your name forth. And that's exactly what I did.
Great, thank you. It's interesting that both firms discuss seriously about an external candidate. That's unique. Chuck, you mentioned the nominating process. How many people put their name in the hat, and how did you feel, or how important was it for you to formally go on record that you were interested in the process?
During the initial process, like I said, a lot of us went in, but I would say that there were only 3 viable candidates in the collective opinion of the people going through the process, due to their level of ownership and their length of time with the firm, years of experience, etc. And as we've said, we failed in that process. We also went to an external candidate national search for the CEO position. I was on the interview team. We made offers to a couple of folks, and they were declined for various reasons. But when it came down to it, and we advertised, the board of directors advertised internally for, okay, if you want to, we're going to do this one more time internally. And if you feel like you are a candidate for CEO position, send us your resume and you will be evaluated by the board of directors. So at that point in time, there was only two, myself and another principal in the firm. So it was difficult. He is still with the firm. He has been with the firm over 30 years, 37 years, I believe. So it's not something that was a deal breaker, but we just had to make that decision and move on, and that's what we did. Larry did not tell me there was a great recession coming, 2 years later or a year and a half later. He didn't let me know that. So we did have to go through that, but we made it.
Well, thanks. And listeners, I think you've heard several different ways that people have been nominated, and certainly there's other ways to do it, but we're very supportive of individuals going on record that they are interested and that it's an important step in the process. So the topic of leadership characteristics has been brought up previously. Cliff, when you think about the characteristics that you were looking for in the new CEO, what are your top 2 or 3? What was really important to you?
I would say that a great communicator was a high priority. The pool of candidates, and I'll just say we had 5 candidates for CEO and we had 2 candidates for COO. All of the candidates were very good communicators, so that was good to see. But it was critical because you really couldn't represent the firm without being able to articulate what our message was. So that was key. Another was basically a proven and respected individual, someone that people could trust, and I think that's important as well. And I would just say after that, somebody that could be the motivator, someone that could be the office cheerleader, if you would, but could really carry the banner of the organization. And we were very lucky to have candidates and a CEO that we did select that was able to do that. And if I might just add one last thing, in our process, we had very frank discussions, and you had to be so thoroughly honest and transparent with all of the candidates and all of the leadership team. Everybody knew that there was going to be one CEO and one COO, even though there were multiple candidates being considered. And it was clear and it was agreed that when we made the selection, because it was thorough and it was near exhaustive, that the most important next step was for everybody to coalesce and support those new positions. And that's exactly what we did.
Well, thank you for bringing up that point, and Chuck, for you highlighting this as well. When you have multiple candidates, there will only be one chosen, and how you work with the remaining people that don't get named the CEO is a really critical part of the process. So thank you for reinforcing that. Larry, what were a couple of the most important characteristics from your standpoint?
The characteristics of
what in a leader? What were you most interested in the leader being able to portray or have as a skill?
This is 14 years ago, but I would probably think along the lines of communications, ability to relate to clients, and a commitment to continue the philosophy that involved in the firm about giving young people that have ownership capabilities and give them a chance to have ownership and try to avoid people leaving the firm to start their own company. I mean, over the years prior to starting the EMC, I saw that frequently. And so I think when you look at, let's see, Chuck, what has it been, 40 years now or 40 plus, somewhere like that? We've had, I think, about 25 owners of varying degrees. And of the 25, I forget what y'all are at now, 15 or 16 or something, whatever. Over a period of 40 years, there's only been 10 that have gone on their separate way. So not too bad.
Great. That does show a lot of terrific leadership on your part. Mark, as you think about these characteristics that were just named, did you feel like you could live up to them?
Yeah, I guess there certainly. Although I guess a couple of points in reflecting on your question, Brian. One is, did I feel like I could live up to them? I think humility was an important aspect of leadership in my mind, and it was to support have a support team myself. And so in thinking about this transition, it's not that I was out there on my own. And as soon as we made the announcement, it was really surround myself with people who would support me in that in this new role. And so that I relied on the assistance of everyone else to do my job well, and that I think was an important part of taking this on. But certainly the understanding that I needed to represent the firm externally and then communicate effectively internally. I think those are two of the most important aspects of the role.
Great, thank you. Chuck, was there anything that you were nervous about as it related to the expectations? You're on mute, Chuck.
Quite honestly, at the time that I became the CEO, I was in charge of about 65% of the company anyway. As it related to the branch offices, I was a division manager. So I was comfortable leading the folks that I was leading, and I did not feel like leading the rest of the company would be that much of a challenge. Now, obviously, I would be lying if I said I was not nervous about it, because of the fact that I think I was 38 years old at the time, and that in and of itself, to a lot of our staff and peers, had a lot of negative connotations, and I think that it took time to overcome some of that, but in the end, I believe that I've done as good a job as I can. So,
great. Well, thank you. Just to wrap up this aspect of the characteristics, PSMJ has developed its own list of important leadership characteristics. I think about 27 of them, and these can be used to inform a company's development of this criteria. But the point is, each firm has got to develop its leadership criteria and what it believes is important for the CEO position. Let's move on to the transparency aspect of this. It's been brought up several times. Larry, how is the process shared with the staff?
It's been 14 years. I mean, it was an open, all I can say, it was quite open. I mean, nobody, we had the whole management of the firm was transparent. I mean, we had salary schedules that were published within the company that, you know, employees knew what everybody made, you know. So there was no, I don't recall our mechanism. I just recall, I don't think there was anything else left to be open up that we didn't open up.
Right. Well, good. Well, thank you. Cliff, what steps did you take to share what was going on with the staff?
Well, one of the things that we had done is we would have weekly huddles, we call them, where we gather virtually, all the offices together during the pandemic. And prior to the pandemic, we would still do them monthly. And so any event we had as an organization, or these huddles, we call them, we talk about transition opportunities for folks within the organization, things that they could be doing to broaden their experience within the organization. So it was probably December of 2019 when we officially let people know of the pending transition of me, and that we were going through a process and had been in a process for quite some time. And that the general timeline was that we would be finalizing a decision in March of 20 and establishing a new CEO and COO the beginning of June of 2020. So it was announced to the whole office, and there was a lot of questions and comments, but we were keeping everything very internal, and we wanted to make sure we announced the office before we announced publicly.
Right. Well, good. Well, I appreciate the transparency that both firms took to share with the staff and let them know what was going on. I see it's about 15 minutes before we need to wrap up. I've got a few questions here that I'll ask, and anybody can jump in. The first one is, how did you feel about the entire process? What did you really like about it? Anybody want to tackle that one?
Well, I'll jump in, and that I think it was very, very helpful. This is not something, a process that a firm goes through very, very frequently, and so having a partner that helped us with a strategy and a roadmap was, I think, probably one of the most helpful places for us to begin and to really kind of guide us along that process. And so it allowed us to kind of regulate ourselves and see where we were in the process. And so I think that was really, really helpful. I think what I would take away from the entire journey, I think Cliff addressed a little bit, was this idea that all participants should have a clear understanding at the beginning that as you're going through this, that the assessments are an area where you've got to be willing to understand that it's going to display competencies, the areas that you excel in and areas that you don't excel in, as perceived by not only the Harrison assessment, but also we did a peer assessment as well. And I think people have to understand that we're all in it for the right reason, and it's ultimately a successful transition for the company.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mark, for those encouragements. Chuck, I'll ask the other side of the question. Was there anything you disliked about the process?
I guess the limitations that we put on ourselves by really only focusing on 3 members of the staff at that time. And maybe that was a mental thing, or maybe it was just, well, it's actually written in our bylaws that you have to be a senior principal of the firm to be the chief executive. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There could have been provisions made that said, by the way, if one of you gets chosen, we'll work it out through bonuses or whatever, which is, actually what happened with me in the end. because I was not a senior principal at that time. So I think that as far as the process goes, I agree with Mark that having a process is important. You know, we're technical minded people, no matter what we do, and being able to structure something and see the equation that it's hard to put a values on come to light with selection of good folks like Mark as being CEO. I think that's important. I think having that structure and the guidance is important also.
Great. Thank you. Cliff, how about you? Looking back on the entire process, would you have changed anything?
Oh, just minor things I would have changed. I think one of the things that was really inspiring for me throughout this, and what I thought was great as a result of this process, was the fact that as principals and partners, we get together twice a month and talk about business. We talk about finance. We talk about studio performance. We talk about organizational achievement. When I had a chance to hear from my partners at a different level, at an organizational leadership level, from a visionary level, about how they saw this organization moving forward, that was inspiring to me. And I will never forget it, because it was motivational, made me regret leaving based on some of the visions that I was hearing. But it was really, I really enjoyed that.
Great. Well, thank you. And Larry, thinking back, anything you would have changed that might be interesting for our listeners?
No, I don't. I mean, it worked. Company's going on.
Exactly.
I'm sure it'll be here when I check out somewhere down the road. So that's the whole goal of a successful transition, is to continue the legacy of the company. And I think from what Chuck has reported to me, that they're well on the way to being successful for the next 10, 20 years. Maybe
yes.
one day they'll have a 150-year history. Who knows?
Who knows? Who knows? I'm always interested when leaders take over. I'm going to ask Chuck and Mark this question just quickly. If you could say what percentage you were prepared to take over the position, where would you put the needle?
Chuck, you've been in the news for longer than I have, so I'll let you go first.
I've got a blower outside my window, so if it kicks on, I'll be hard to hear. I would say that I was probably 75% prepared, and I think the side that I was missing was the banking relationships and how to interact with them. EMC Larry had the financials of the firm well under control. We knew what the metrics were. We knew what the targets were, and we are a business-centered practice. We figured that out long ago. So I think that the strategic planning sessions that I was able to attend prior to taking on the role, the interaction with the management team, and then the culmination being on the board of directors and then being chairman of the board, I think I was still 75%, because there were just so many, there are things that you don't know, and there was a lot of those that kept coming up. So,
thank you for that answer, Mark. What percentage were you at?
Sure. If I had it's still a work in progress here, but I'd say somewhere around 75% feels about right too, if I had to put a number on it. I always like to say that sort of the transition wasn't a moment in time. It's an evolution, and it's ongoing, continuing. So this is only 3 months into it, and in some ways it started several years ago. But I like some of the things that Chuck also suggested I think were very important aspects for preparing me for this role too, and that was involvement at the ownership level in a series of strategy sessions and retreats going back probably 5 to 7 years before this. And so really being involved in many of those helped in understanding what it took from that perspective. But I also, again, suggest that this is going to be a work in progress going forward too. And so I'll continue to prepare myself and prepare the firm.
Great. Well, I appreciate both of you bringing up the importance of a strategic plan and helping train up that new leader. We've got about a minute before I turn it back over to Kathy to see if there's any questions. Each of you have 15 seconds to encourage our listeners with one thing that is really critical as it relates to the transition for the CEO position. And Cliff, I'll start with you.
So planning, transparency, and just complete honesty in the process. Inclusivity, all of that made for a successful transition.
Thank you. Chuck?
I would say that it's most important that you be honest with yourself and with your ownership team, with your board, and not limit. If you're doing a true internal search, which I believe is the best way to do it, then you need to have an open mind as it relates to the candidates.
Great. Thank you. Mark?
Yeah, I think the benefit of having two others go before is they've already covered a lot of really good ground, but I think there's been a lot of traits. I think the understanding that there was not just necessarily one candidate that could do the job. There was probably many of the candidates that came forward to do the job, but I think it was the idea that to have a sense of humility and listen to others around you to getting through the process. I think those were really, really important.
Great, thank you. And Larry, what's your 15-second advice?
Advice is to start early, cover all the bases for the person that's leaving or retiring, and for the new person coming in. And that includes leadership, finances, and be prepared to make a clean break.
Thank you. Well, the hour's gone by really fast, and your input has been terrific. I want to thank you for your time. Kathy, are there any questions that we could take for a few minutes?
Yeah, we have a couple of minutes. We do have a few, but let me try to get to a couple. For Cliff, were you looking for someone for a new direction, or you wanted to carry on what you have already started, or did you want it to be a mixture?
Yeah, we had, when I took over, developed a objective of growth, not just to grow. It was very selective, very gradual, but we wanted to grow geographically, which we did. There was, I believe, at the time that we accomplished that, we began to experience much more success, which was really good. Validate the process. To take it from that point, once we hit our geographic diversification, it was a perfect time to say, okay, do we evolve as an organization? I wanted to hear those visions. I think everybody wanted to hear, where do we go from here? So I think it was to build upon the foundation that we had built, and then to reprioritize what the next steps were. And it was important that each candidate was able to articulate that for us.
Okay, and the last question, and there are more, but I'll share them with Brian and we'll get them all answered. But this is for Chuck. What are you doing now to prepare for the next transition?
It's a very good question. Our organization is set now as far as the structure goes, where we are developing leaders within divisions and branch managers. So if we're going to have an internal candidate take over from where I am, I'm sure that it's going to be pulled from one of those structures. We're continuing the strategic planning process. We're due next year. We were actually due this year to have an off-site strategic planning retreat. But that has been kicked down the road till next year. So we're continuing the process, strategic planning. That includes leadership transition.
All right, thank you. Again, everyone look for that email from me. It'll have some information about everything that we talked about. And Brian, any last words?
Well, again, to our guests, thank you very much. You were very generous with your time and thoughts. And to our audience, if you have any questions you'd like to direct to me about the CEO transition, you can contact me at 505-239-6698, or my email address is bburnett@psmj.com. And we hope that you have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good day.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.